When you call 911, you usually think of a house on fire, an accident, or a dangerous crime. But in reality, sometimes the operator has to ask themselves, is this an emergency? Or a live sitcom episode some people call because they ran out of toilet paper, panicking in the bathroom. Some report to the police because the delivered pizza wasn't perfectly round. Some even want the police to catch the wind because a $20 bill got blown away. Sounds unbelievable, but it's all true. Today we're going to explore 31 of the dumbest 911 calls ever recorded and laugh until our stomachs hurt. Story 1. The thief who forgot where he parked. Have you ever heard of a thief forgetting where he left his own car? In California, a guy who had just borrowed someone else's Honda called 911 in a panic. The reason he couldn't find the car, and even gave the operator the full license plate, hoping the police would help recover his lost property. The problem was, the car he was looking for was the very one he had stolen just a few hours earlier. The operator was definitely shocked, and the police could only shake their heads and laugh. Instead of chasing a mysterious theft, they just had to arrest the guy who had basically turned himself in. What's interesting is his attitude, worried, but convinced he was doing the right thing. The police laughed while taking notes on the whole incident. No wonder he earned the title of Most Honest Customer of the Year. This proves that sometimes, being too honest too early can get you into trouble. Story 2. The man who reported a drunk driver, and it was himself. You'd think calling 911 to report a drunk driver would have the police hunting a dangerous criminal. But in Florida, one man took absurd to a whole new level. He called 911, describing in detail a swerving car and kept updating the operator with its location. The police rushed out ready to handle a dangerous situation, only to realize the car belonged to the caller himself. He was so drunk he didn't realize he was reporting himself. The operator and the police could only shake their heads and laugh. This man created a perfect loop of absurdity. He turned himself in while dragging the entire police force into the game he made. It's a vivid reminder that sometimes being overly vigilant can lead to situations so funny they're hard to believe. Story 3. The toilet paper crisis. You think 911 is only for house fires, accidents, or crimes? Not exactly. In one city, a woman called 911 from her bathroom in a state of panic. No accident, no theft, just she ran out of toilet paper mid-situation. She seriously requested the police to bring a new roll immediately to rescue her emergency. The operator initially couldn't believe their ears and had to ask multiple times to confirm it was a real call. The police standing outside probably wondered, is 911 turning into a delivery service? But she was completely convinced this was an emergency, refusing to accept that 911 doesn't deliver toilet paper. This call quickly became one of the funniest examples of absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing. Story 4. The family held hostage by a cat. Have you ever heard of a cat becoming the family criminal? A family in the US called 911 because their over 10-pound cat was angry, standing in front of the bedroom door and growling whenever anyone tried to leave, turning the whole house into prisoners in their own home. The police receiving the call surely raised their eyebrows. This was a new kind of emergency. When they arrived, they had to be careful to handle the furry criminal, a cat that knew how to control its living space. The family explained that anyone trying to leave risked growls or threats from sharp claws. The operator recorded the call as a prime example of a bizarre situation. This call proves that sometimes the most dangerous enemy isn't human, but the cat at home presenting the police with unbelievable challenges in their daily work. Story 5. The McNuggets crisis. Do you think 911 is only for house fires, accidents, or dangerous crimes? Totally wrong. A woman in the US called 911 because the nearby McDonald's ran out of McNuggets. To her, this was a serious emergency, requiring immediate police intervention. She demanded the authorities address this injustice, insisting that arriving at the store only to find no McNuggets was completely unacceptable. The operator initially couldn't believe their ears, asking multiple times to confirm it was a real call. After the third consecutive call, the police finally had to warn her for abusing the emergency line, explaining that 911 is not a food delivery service. Still, this call quickly became one of the funniest examples of Americans turning a minor inconvenience into a serious emergency, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing. Story 6. The Not-So-Round Pizza. You'd think only serious problems deserve a 911 call. A man in the US proved otherwise. He called the police because the pizza delivered to his home wasn't perfectly round. The slightly oval shape made him feel a severe aesthetic violation. He even wanted the police to come measure it and serve as evidence for a potential lawsuit, as if this were a crime in geometry. The operator at first couldn't believe their ears, asking repeatedly to confirm it was a real call. When the police arrived, they politely refused to participate in this geometric investigation. The pizza remained unchanged, and the man learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes an oval pizza is not an emergency, and 911 is not a service for resolving culinary art disputes. Story 7. The Sarcastic GPS. Have you ever thought a GPS could make you so angry you'd call 911? A man in the US did exactly that. He called the police to complain about the voice of the GPS in his car. According to him, the female voice in the navigation system spoke with a sarcastic tone, as if mocking him every time he took a wrong turn. The classic phrase "recalculating" made him feel seriously offended, as if the GPS was giving him the stink eye from the dashboard. He seriously asked the operator if he could get a restraining order against the GPS, treating it as a real technological harasser. The operator was initially shocked and tried to explain that the police cannot investigate personal electronic devices. The GPS kept giving directions, and he learned that sometimes imagined sarcasm from a machine is enough to make you a 911 caller. Story 8. The $20 stolen by the wind. Have you ever heard of someone calling 911 to report a theft caused by the wind? A woman in the US did exactly that. She called the police to report that $20 had been stolen. When the operator asked who the suspect was, she seriously replied, "The wind." A strong gust had blown the bill out of her hand, carrying it away. She wanted an official report to document the criminal act of this natural element. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call. The police then had to explain that they cannot investigate an invisible thief and the wind is not legally responsible. Still, this call quickly became a classic example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police laughing at human creativity. Story 9. Forgotten Facebook password. Can you believe someone could call 911 because they forgot their Facebook password? A woman in the US did exactly that. She called 911, convinced the police could help her recover her locked Facebook account. The operator at first couldn't believe their ears. They had to patiently explain that the police do not manage Facebook servers and no special task force is responsible for rescuing social media passwords. She remained very serious, describing the sense of crisis when unable to log in as if this were a national security emergency. In the end, the only and least funny solution was click Forgot Password. Follow the recovery steps and regain her account herself. This call became a perfect example of how some Americans turn a minor issue into a major crisis, leaving the operator sighing and laughing quietly. Story 10. The Monopoly Argument. Have you ever heard of a couple calling 911 over a game dispute? A couple in the US was playing Monopoly when things got heated. One accused the other of cheating the bank, moving pieces incorrectly, and investigating property distribution in the game. In a fit of anger, they decided to call 911 for the police to come to their house as referees. The operator raised their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call, since clearly no one expects Monopoly to be a security issue. When the police arrived, they politely explained that Monopoly rules are not part of criminal law and they cannot intervene to arbitrate a board game at a private home. In the end, the couple had to resolve the dispute themselves, while the police and operator could only shake their heads and laugh. This is a prime example of the absurd reasons Americans call. Story 11. The Too Loud Singing Bird. Can you believe someone could call 911 just because a bird was singing? A man in the US did exactly that. He called the police to report that the robin outside his window was singing too loudly, violating noise laws and seriously affecting his life. He wanted the police to punish the bird for performing without permission, as if this were an illegal concert. The operator was initially shocked and had to confirm it was a real call. When the police arrived, they explained that the bird didn't have a performance permit and they couldn't do anything about natural sounds. The bird kept singing loudly outside, completely unconcerned with humans. This is a perfect example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the police and the operator shaking their heads and laughing. Story 12. Complaining about the sun. Can you imagine calling 911 because the sun is too bright? A man in the US did exactly that. He called the police to report that the harsh sunlight was making his day uncomfortable, causing him serious inconvenience. He wanted to file an official complaint for the police to handle the situation, treating sunlight as a legal violation. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police received the information, they had to explain that there's no way to punish the sun, and it is clearly a natural element beyond anyone's control. This call became one of the prime examples of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the police and the operator shaking their heads and laughing at human creativity. Story 13. The suspicious deer. Can you believe someone could call 911 because of a deer? A woman in the US did exactly that. She called the police to report that a deer was eating flowers in her yard, and she believed it was a suspicious wanderer that needed to be dealt with immediately. She seriously requested the police to come and apprehend the deer, treating it like a criminal trespassing on private property. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they quickly realized the deer was completely harmless, simply enjoying its natural meal and not complying with any arrest order from humans. This call is a perfect example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing at human creativity. Story 14. The roommate was a ghost. Have you ever heard of someone calling 911 to evict a ghost? A man in the US did exactly that. He called the police complaining that his roommate was a spirit living in the house, not paying rent and making noises at night that kept him awake. He seriously requested the police serve an eviction notice to the ghost, treating it like an illegal tenant. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a Halloween joke. When the police arrived, they quickly realized the tenant wasn't present at all, just some strange noises in the room. Although they couldn't fulfill the request, they still documented it as one of the strangest 911 calls ever received. This call proves that sometimes the most troublesome criminals aren't human, but ghosts, at least according to this American. Story 15. The dog refusing to play fetch. Can you believe someone could call 911 just because their dog wouldn't play fetch? A woman in the US did exactly that. She called the police to report that her dog refused to pick up the ball and wouldn't participate in its favorite game. According to her, the dog was deliberately being defiant, showing a clear, uncooperative attitude. She wanted the police to come to her house to motivate the dog, as if officers had the authority to enforce the law on pets. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they realized the dog was completely carefree, paying no attention to human rules or requests. This call became a perfect example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing at the endless creativity of the owner. Story 16. The scary mime. Have you ever heard of someone calling 911 because of a mime? A woman in the US did exactly that. She called the police to report that a mime was standing right outside her window, silently performing gestures, but the silence scared her so much she couldn't tolerate it. According to her, this was a form of harassment through silence, and she seriously requested the police to arrest the mime. The operator at first couldn't believe their ears and had to confirm several times that it was a real call. When the police arrived, they saw the mime was completely harmless, just practicing. There was nothing dangerous or illegal happening. This call became a prime example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the police and the operator shaking their heads and laughing at human creativity. Story 17. The song stuck in his head. Have you ever had a song stuck in your head so badly you wanted to call 911? A man in the US did exactly that. He called the police because a melody had been haunting him for 3 straight days, making him feel almost desperate. He seriously hoped the police had a way to make the song stop, as if this were a real emergency requiring immediate action. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times, trying to explain that they don't have a special task force for stuck-in-your-head songs. During the call, he could only sing the wrong rhythm for the operator to illustrate the song, making the entire call both absurd and hilarious. This call quickly became a classic example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing at human creativity. Story 18. The fake Rolex. Have you ever heard of someone calling 911 over a fake watch? A man in the US bought a Rolex from a stranger in a parking lot. A few hours later, the gold plating started to peel, and he felt he had been seriously scammed. He decided to call 911 to report a high-end watch fraud, believing the police could intervene and help him resolve the issue immediately. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times, wondering if this was a joke. When the police arrived, they politely reminded him that buying counterfeit goods is illegal and that calling 911 to report a broken watch is not part of their duties. The watch remained there, the gold peeling, and he learned an important lesson. The police are not a street-side Rolex quality control service. Story 19. The neighbor who chews too loud. Have you ever heard of someone calling 911 because their neighbor chews too loudly? A man in the US did exactly that. He called the police to report that his neighbor's chewing was excessively loud, noisy, and seriously disturbing, as if it were an emergency threatening his mental health. He requested the police come and ask the neighbor to chew more quietly, as if officers had the authority to control the volume of someone else's meal. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times, trying to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they politely explained that 911 is not a service for regulating chewing volume, and loud chewing is not a crime. This call became a classic example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing at human creativity. Story 20. The lying fortune cookie. Can you imagine calling 911 over a fortune cookie? A woman in the US did exactly that. She believed the fortune slip had deceived her, promising she would have a lucky day. But nothing good happened all day. Angry, she seriously requested the police to handle the cookie's false advertising. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times, wondering if this was a joke or a truly serious situation. When the police arrived, they had to explain that no law governs fortune cookies, and this was clearly an absurd reason to call 911. The cookie remained there, silent, innocent, and completely unconcerned with the advertising lawsuit. This call became a classic example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing at human creativity. Story 21. The secret flamingos. Can you believe someone could call 911 over plastic flamingos? A man in the US did exactly that. He believed his neighbors were using the plastic birds in their yard to send secret criminal messages, as if this were a real-life spy operation. He seriously requested the police to decode the flamingo code, treating the decorations as important evidence. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they quickly realized that all of it was just ordinary plastic flamingos, completely harmless and sending no messages at all. This call became a prime example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing at the extremely bizarre creativity of humans. Story 22. Self-checkout labor exploitation. Can you imagine someone calling 911 just because a self-checkout machine? A man in the US did exactly that. He called from a supermarket complaining that the self-checkout forced him to scan and bag his own items. According to him, this was unpaid labor, completely unfair and deserving immediate action. He seriously wanted the police to intervene at the store, as if they were breaking labor laws against him. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they politely explained that 911 is not a self-checkout monitoring service, and scanning your own items is a normal part of the shopping experience. The machine remained silent. The customer still fumbled with his cart, and he realized that sometimes The exploitation exists only in your imagination. Story 23. Complaining about gravity. Have you ever heard of someone calling 911 to complain about gravity? A man in the US did exactly that. He tripped on the sidewalk, luckily uninjured, but instead of getting up and continuing, he decided to call 911 to complain about the force of gravity. He seriously asked the operator who was in charge of gravity in the city and whether the police could intervene to reduce the weight of the world. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times, trying to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they politely explained that gravity is a natural force and no one in the city has the authority to adjust it. The man could only shake his head, realizing that sometimes the reasons people call 911 can be so absurd they're hilarious, leaving both the operator and the police laughing quietly. Story 24. The Suspicious Squirrel. Can you imagine calling 911 over a squirrel? A man in the US did exactly that. He called the police to report that a squirrel was staring at him for too long, making him believe it was spying on his every move. According to him, this was a serious situation requiring immediate police intervention. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived at the scene, they realized the squirrel was completely harmless, just sitting and nibbling on a nut. However, he still felt it was suspicious watching his every move like a tiny agent in a furry coat. This call became a perfect example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing at the extremely bizarre imagination of humans. Story 25. The reality show breakup. Can you imagine someone calling 911 because a couple on a reality show broke up? A woman in the US did exactly that. She called the police, seriously complaining that her favorite couple had split, causing her severe emotional distress. According to her, this event warranted an investigation, and she even wanted to sue the producers for emotional harm. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they politely explained that TV drama is not within their jurisdiction, and they cannot intervene in the romantic lives of celebrities on TV. This call quickly became a prime example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing at the extremely bizarre creativity of humans. Story 26. Call of Duty cheater. Can you imagine a teenager calling 911 because of an opponent in a game? A teen in the US did exactly that. He called the police to report that his opponent in a Call of Duty match was cheating, causing him to lose repeatedly and feel seriously wronged. According to him, this was a digital war crime and the police needed to track the other player's IP to punish them. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they had to explain that the Geneva Convention doesn't apply to online games and there's no law allowing them to hunt down virtual criminals in a game. This call became a perfect example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing at the teen's extremely bizarre imagination and seriousness. Story 27. Losing an hour to DST. Can you imagine calling 911 because you lost an hour? A man in the US did exactly that. He called the police complaining that daylight saving time, DST, had stolen one precious hour of his life. According to him, this was an illegal act carried out by the government, and he wanted to file a crime report to hold someone accountable. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they explained that time cannot be recovered, and DST is not a crime they can handle. The man remained upset, but the police could only shake their heads and laugh at his absolute seriousness. This call is a perfect example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, showing that sometimes people get stressed over things, completely beyond their control. Story 28. The outdated calendar. Have you ever heard of someone calling 911 because a calendar no longer worked? A man in the US did exactly that. He complained that his old calendar suddenly became useless, believing it was a conspiracy by the calendar industry to force people to buy a new one every year. He seriously wanted the police to intervene and even sue the company for forcing consumers to buy new calendars. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they explained that they do not investigate the calendar industry and this issue is beyond the law. The call quickly became a prime example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police shaking their heads and laughing at human imagination run wild. Story 29. The Offensive Snowman. Can you believe someone could call 911 because a snowman? A person in the US did exactly that. He called the police to report that his neighbor's snowman had a shape inappropriate for children, making him feel offended and demanding immediate police intervention. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times, asking repeatedly to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they checked the situation and discovered the snowman was completely harmless, standing outside cold and silent, posing no threat to anyone. Although nothing illegal was happening, this call quickly became a classic example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the operator and the police confused and quietly laughing. Truly a case, extremely cold but also incredibly funny. Story 30. The Judgmental Statue. Can you believe someone could call 911 because a statue? A woman in the US did exactly that. She called the police to report that a statue in the park was always watching her, making her feel seriously judged on every life choice, from her clothing style to personal decisions. She seriously requested the police to make the statue turn away, or at least tone down its judgmental attitude so she could walk without mental pressure. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call. When the police arrived, the statue remained in its calm pose with its judgmental attitude intact. Although they couldn't intervene, this call became a prime example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the police and the operator shaking their heads and quietly laughing at human creativity run wild. Story 31. The Duck Swimming Out of Line. Can you imagine calling 911 just because ducks weren't swimming in order? A man in the US did exactly that. He called the police to report that the ducks in the pond weren't swimming in a neat line, making him feel that public order was disrupted and demanding immediate intervention. He seriously requested the police to teach the ducks to swim in formation as if they had a professional duck training program. The operator surely had to raise their eyebrows several times to confirm it was a real call and not a joke. When the police arrived, they explained that they do not have a duck training program and cannot adjust the ducks' natural swimming. The ducks continued swimming their own way, while the man could only shake his head in disappointment. This call became a classic example of the absurd reasons Americans call 911, leaving both the police and the operator quietly laughing at human imagination run wild. After all 31 of these stories, it's clear that for some people the line between a real emergency and a minor annoyance almost doesn't exist. If you were a police officer, which call would you handle first? Share in the comments the story that surprised you the most. And if you've ever witnessed a similarly ridiculous situation, tell us about it. We want to laugh along with you. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss more bizarre, absurd yet completely true stories that will make you both laugh and shake your head in disbelief.